Hello everybody, welcome to my book review. Today we are going to discuss Human Acts by Han Kang. Now, I absolutely fell in love with Han Kang earlier this year when I read her book The Vegetarian, the Man Booker International Prize winner, and I was so taken with the originality of her writing and the sort of surreal dark tone of the worlds that she examined that I was so keen to read another book by her. And so I turned to Human Acts. Now, Human Acts is partly based on a true story, on true events. It is centered around the period of civil unrest in South Korea in 1980. For in 1979, the then dictator of South Korea, Park, was assassinated. And what followed was effectively a military coup, and there was extensive suppression and oppression in South Korea. And this resulted in a burst of protests around the town of Gwangju for 2 weeks in 1980. Now, these protests were violently suppressed by the army, who opened fire on unarmed demonstrators, and it was a story, I suppose, much like Tiananmen, a period that was not talked about, covered up, smothered, censored for decades afterwards. And there is still to this day great difficulty in getting the accuracy of what happened on the ground. The government will say only 200 people died, but foreign reports and more likely reports from human rights organisations put the death toll at 2,000. But more than that, there was extensive torture of the citizens of Gwangju and their supporters as the army perpetuated crimes in order to suppress any kind of dissent following that period. Now, what Han Kang does is she follows the voices that came from those protests through a series of different characters throughout the book. Some in the present day of 1980, of protesters, of students working in makeshift morgues, and then on through the years of playwrights who are having their plays censored 20, 30 years later, and journalists who are revisiting torture and interrogation that happened to them many years before, and the legacy of that for them and their lives as they continued onwards. One of the most seductive aspects about this book is not all the narration, which happens to be almost entirely in the second person throughout this book, actually comes from living characters. One of the most intriguing chapters is the second or third chapter, which is even from a person of a dead person, someone who was shot during the protests. And it's such a violent period on the streets of Gwangju at that time, that and the suddenness of his death, of his killing by soldiers, that there's a real disconnect from his soul, from his body, and moving on to the afterlife. And Han Kang captures this voice in this difficult no man's land territory where he's dead but not at peace, and can witness events but cannot feel them. This is an incredibly powerful book. It is a book that examines, as the title says, what human beings are capable of, both good and bad. For the protesters in this book are remarkably selfless and brave, and even in the years afterwards they carry the weight of what happened with them, but they are still good people, good citizens. They haven't let it destroy them. Compared to that, the other side with the soldiers, many of whom had come from wars abroad, who are willing to commit heinous and terrible acts on people who were their brothers, sisters, families, friends, fellow South Koreans, but also those soldiers who were caught in between, who couldn't believe that they were being asked to open fire on their fellow country people. The power of Human Acts, though, is there are moments where it is heartbreaking. I wouldn't say there are moments of graphic torture in here, so I wouldn't be worried about reading this book if that is something you find difficult. There are scenes where it's very painful and emotionally anxious, and the torture is there, almost explicit but more implied. But if you're someone who's nervous about graphic scenes of torture, I wouldn't say this was a problem. What I found particularly powerful, which I find fascinating about Han Kang, and I've only read 2 books by her, is her ability to question us. So like I said, the narrator's often in the second person, and you get a lot of you referred to. You did this, you did that. And that you's kind of quite interesting, because sometimes that you refers to another character as someone who's looking for someone else, their mother or their son or their friend. You went away. You did not see me. But sometimes that you, I can't help feeling, refers to us, the reader. You did this. It invites complicity, and it sort of invites comradeship as well. It's not always in the accusing tone. But what I find really fascinating about Han Kang getting back to what I was just about to finish my thought, is her ability to challenge us on what we consider humanity. This book is called Human Acts. It's a terrific translation, by the way, from Deborah Smith, who I know translated The Vegetarian. She captures the nuance of Han Kang's language beautifully. Particularly, that's why I was thinking about the second person, because it's done so very well in English. But it's really inviting us to think, what is humanity? Because we often use that term humanity to refer to good things. They had a great capacity for humanity. Their humanity was endless. But what if humanity, this great elusive concept, what if it is bad? What if in our humanity is to be cruel, is to be corrupted by having power over others, or our obedience to rules that are wrong? What if that is as much humanity as the good stuff and the compassion and the caring for those who are dying or dead, even though you don't know them? What we consider to be humanity, this is what Han Kang is testing. Our humanity could actually be a lot more complex than the very simplistic notion that we use for that word today. Human Acts is extraordinary. It's quite slim, but my goodness, this is a fantastic book. And I urge you to really get involved with Han Kang. She's such a great writer. Human Acts, The Vegetarian, take your pick. Fantastic. I love this book. Heartbreaking, powerful. Whew! It will sear your mind. Wonderful.